guys. Congratulations to the Core of the Year, Bex. Excellent speech. Thank you. That was wonderful. I feel like I'm now here as the person to rain on all of that love and joy and excitement about the natural world. Because now we got to talk about politics. You're like, the world, it's so great and we can enjoy it and be one with it. And I'm like, actually, no. No, we can't. We talk about the real world of politics, and it's not good. I'm also sort of exhausted. I've just spent the last 2 weeks between Iowa and New Hampshire, and I got back on Sunday, and so we'll try to make some sense of what that all is. But look, I think the most important thing as you're trying to keep on top of what's going on, it is hard to do. I do it for a living, and I can barely do it. You people have real lives, and you're doing really important things, and so it's hard to know what do you pay attention to, what should you ignore. You're getting all these alerts constantly, right, from your social media, from the news networks. If you dare to watch cable, it's there to just keep you outraged at every moment. And so you think you can't turn it off. They do that on purpose, by the way. Don't turn it off. Something else really terrible is going to happen. Keep watching. So you don't get a very good perspective on what's going on, and also how to think about a presidential election. And even though we are in a very unique moment, presidential elections still are like almost anything else. There's a foundation. There are building blocks that go into this. So for me, and I'm going to do this today for you all, I like to pare down all of the chatter and just get right down to the foundation. Okay, we'll strip away everything else. So you have to understand 3 key things. First, the state of the president. How do people view the sitting president, right? The president running for re-election. Then how the electorate, and in this case we're going to talk a lot about the Electoral College, right? How it works, who elects the president. And then finally, who is the opponent to that president? Who are Democrats going to nominate? The first piece, when you look at the president, it's important to understand it's really hard to lose as an incumbent president. You almost have to try to lose, which in many ways the president has tried to do moments in this, especially at a time where the public and the mood around the economy is as optimistic as it's been in the last, we have to go back about 25 years to the last time we've seen the electorate as optimistic about the current state of the economy. But there's something really interesting about this president. He's the most unconventional, he's the most unpredictable, fill in the blank, right, norm busting, et cetera, and yet opinions about him, no matter how crazy things get, no matter how chaotic this environment seems, opinions about him are pretty well set, and they haven't moved since he ran for president. He was elected with 46% of the popular vote. His approval rating has stayed within a very narrow range, in fact, the narrowest range in modern history. He has not, until recently, been able to break 46% approval rating, but he's also never gotten below 35%. So that 10, 11-point range in his approval rating, as I said, that's incredibly narrow. Most presidents, and here's part of the reason why it's so narrow, most presidents get a honeymoon, right? You get elected, people give you sort of the benefit of the doubt. Even those on the other side of the aisle say, well, let's just check this person out. Barack Obama, for example, started with an approval rating in the 60s. That lasted through about March, April, and then it went down to where this president is in terms of a narrow trading range. He spent the rest of his presidency with a 10, 11-point difference between his highest and his lowest marks. This president didn't get a honeymoon. He didn't get weekend at Niagara Falls. He didn't get a long weekend of a honeymoon. He got nothing, okay? He went in with 46%. He's getting 46% or 35%, or somewhere in between. That's it. Now, there's good news and bad news if you're the president. looking at these numbers. The good news is you've got a really high floor. So even as you're getting impeached, you still have a 42, 43, 44% approval rating. And it's not just that you're getting impeached, it's that anywhere from 45 to 50% of Americans think you should be impeached and removed. The last time we had a president with numbers that looked like that was Richard Nixon, and his approval rating at that moment was 25%, right? This president is somewhere averaging about 44%. So that's the good news. The bad news, as I started off by saying, is in a really good economy, it's not translating to higher support. And if you look at where other previous presidents have been in their re-elections, even when the economy isn't particularly hot, they usually get all the people who say they think the economy is doing well, they get their votes. So you go back to 2004, you go back to 2012, Obama and George W. Bush, 90% of voters in the exit polls who said they felt good about the economy voted for the incumbent. Right now, in polling, this president is only getting 55% of voters who say the economy is good. If you look at the other most recent poll, ABC Washington Post poll, 13% of voters say they approve of the job the president's doing on the economy. There's this 13% chunk. They think the president's doing a pretty good job on the economy, but I do not like the job he's doing as president. You look at where those people say they will vote in November, and 75% of them pick Joe Biden. Only 15% pick Donald Trump. That's not a great sign when, again, the economy should be the thing that is lifting this president, and really all it has done is galvanized his support, but it is not bringing new people over to his side. Now, since impeachment, though, we've seen the president at the higher end of that narrow trading range. So he's at the highest approval ratings in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, in the ABC poll. For the first time ever, he's broken the 45% job approval rating in Gallup, and he's hit 49% job approval rating. He still has not hit 50%, so the first incumbent president running for re-election that has not yet hit 50% job approval rating is not a great place to be, but it's a lot better than being where he was in 2017 or 2018, which was somewhere around 37 or 38%. What we've seen since impeachment is it really has galvanized Republicans, but it didn't do the same with Democrats. So the intensity of support for the president increased, the intensity of opposition basically stayed the same. And I think part of that is, you know, if you're a Democrat and you've been watching the president for the last 3 years, at every moment you think, okay, this is it. Like, the Russia thing, Mueller, we got this. Mueller's gonna testify, it's gonna be awesome, and it's gonna change everybody's mind. And then Mueller testifies, and you're like, what was that guy sitting there? Like, that did not help, right? So then all the impeachment stuff goes away, blah, blah. The Ukraine call, okay, now this is it, right? We've got the transcript where he says out loud, do me a favor. Like, definitely got him now. Nope, didn't got him. Not quite at all. While Republicans see this as just one more attempt to railroad a president, right? These Democrats, they keep coming up with anything they can. And even if they don't like this guy particularly, they are bonded over the sense that, well, you know what? If these guys hate him so much, maybe I should like him even more. And it's easier, it's human instinct when someone of your own is getting attacked to sort of rally around that person. Now, how long this lasts, it's unclear. As we know, the one thing the president is not very good at is being disciplined, okay? If he were, and he focused simply on the economy and campaign promises kept and didn't tweet out things about certain people or spend an hour and a half in a post-acquittal triumphant moment at a prayer breakfast But at this moment, he does look to be in as good of shape as he has been probably in the last 2 years or so. But there's still the question of, if you look again at all of the polling, look at the average, he's at 44%. We've never had a president reelected with a job approval rating of 44%. It's not supposed to work that way. Except that we know that the popular vote and the electoral vote are two very different things. Remember how we learned that in 2000, and then we learned that again in 2016? So the Electoral College, once again, is going to be and should be the focus. Not just how is the president doing overall, how do people feel about him, but how do they feel about him in key battleground states? The battle for the White House goes through, there are two pretty clear paths. One is through the upper Midwest, places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, states that Trump narrowly carried, or in the case of Minnesota, Hillary Clinton narrowly carried. But these are states that Democrats have held, called the Blue Wall. They held these states for 20 years, good years, bad years, right? Clinton won these Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Obama won these, but so did John Kerry, so did Al Gore, okay? Democrats did really well in these states in 2018. They won governor's offices and Senate races and House races. And so if you're Democrats, you're like, how hard can this be? We held these seats for 20 years. We barely lost them in 2016. The combined vote between those three states for Donald Trump was about 80,000 votes. 80,000 votes was the difference between Donald Trump president, Hillary Clinton president. Right? It can't be that hard. I mean, John Kerry won those states, right? Like, we can do this. It's not, can do it. But here's the thing. Those states haven't changed that much between 1992 and now, but the coalitions that make up the Democratic and Republican Party have changed. And where the coalition change is really apparent in states like these three that are overwhelmingly white. Now, we know we've had a gender gap for a long, long time. Women voting more Democratic than men. We know on race, voters of color tend to be much more Democratic than Republican. But white voters, there weren't many distinctions between them besides gender and age. But over the last few years, we've seen this real big divide open up on education. The more educated white voters moving to Democrats, voters without a four-year college degree moving more toward Republican in the era of Trump that has exploded. And those three states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, not only are whiter than average, so if you look at a state like Wisconsin, for example, the voting age population there's 90% white. You go to North Carolina, it's 72%. Arizona's 77%. Texas is 61%. And then look at, again, Wisconsin's, we're going to keep coming back to that place. Anyone here from Wisconsin? Okay, I'm sorry. I say sorry because wait till I get to the point, like it's all coming down. It's all about, everything comes down to Wisconsin. So no pressure at all. There we go. So white non-college voters, in Wisconsin, it's 58% of the electorate. In a place like Colorado, it's 40%. It's 37% over in Virginia. So if you start to put the math together, you see the challenge for Democrats, which is their voters, and there are a lot more Democratic voters. This is why the popular vote is likely to be an even bigger margin between the Democratic nominee and whatever Trump gets, but they are not distributed evenly. So you can get 1 million more votes out of California or Texas or Georgia, but it's not going to change the Electoral College math. The other challenge is that while Democrats are doing better with these, I think of them as like suburban, white, especially female educated voters. I'm going to call these now Peloton moms. I think that's a good description of that group. But there aren't as many of those voters as there are white non-college voters. And they already turn out at a very high rate. There's a direct connection between education and income and voting, right? The higher educated, the more money you have, the more likely it is that you're voting and that you see that there's a reason for you to go and vote. 80% of white college voters turned out in 2016. Only about 55 to 60% of white non-college voters turned out. And so if you can see then where the pool is, right? The pool of voters that Trump Trump is targeting is bigger and deeper than that for Democrats of that white suburban or college vote. So that's the challenge then for Democrats in focusing solely on the upper Midwest. Wisconsin becomes, as I said, this real focal point because let's pretend that Democrats did nothing but win back. They held every close state that Hillary Clinton barely won, which is basically Minnesota and New Hampshire, win Pennsylvania and Michigan. And let's say Trump holds on to those Sun Belt states. These are the states that Democrats are desperately trying to break into: Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona. In the 2018 midterms, which are not a perfect correlation, they're very different. Who turns out in a midterm versus a presidential year? But Democrats were successful in only one of those states, which was Arizona, and by this much, they elected a Democrat to the Senate. So let's give him all those states. Guess where we end up? And by the way, if you want to do this for fun in your free time, there is an app called 270towin.com. It's the number 270towin.com. And I like it because you can, especially if you're using an iPad, you just touch the state and it adds the numbers together. So you don't have to go like, okay, 10 plus, okay, this state has 32, and then I got to, you just touch a state blue and it adds to the Democrat total. You touch state red, it adds to the Republican total. Okay, so let's just do, if you did that math, what you'd end up with is President Trump at 260 electoral votes. Remember, you need 270. The Democrat at 268. And guess who has 10 electoral votes? The state of Wisconsin. And you guys could break that tie, right? 10 votes, boom, there's Trump, 270. 10 votes, boom, there are the Democrats at 278. Now, it never works out that perfectly, but to have one state being the decider, usually these states break together. But this is why Democrats do, I think, have to really look very seriously, and they are very serious about Florida and Arizona and North Carolina. They're going to look at Georgia. Texas is a big, really expensive state that while it is getting more Democratic, to go from 48, which is basically where Beto was in this last election, to 50, that's a lot of people and a lot of money. Okay, so that's the math, and then let's go to the other part that I've been knee-deep in, which is the Democratic race, which looks great, doesn't it? Thank you, Iowa. That's been really, it's been a real fun. So I don't know what's going to happen. This is as muddled of a Democratic primary as I've ever seen. I think we have to be open to literally any possibility right now. But let's just, again, go down to the fundamentals here. This is a party that, more than I've seen at any time I've covered politics, that is more interested in winning than in anything else, more so than ideology, more so than policy. Yes, those things still matter, but the number one question on the minds of so many Democratic voters is who can beat Donald Trump? That's it. Now, what we've seen is two different approaches to that question, essentially. There is what I call the revolutionary approach and then the restorative approach. The revolutionary approach, Bernie Sanders certainly as the anchor of that one, and the restorative, Joe Biden, the anchor of that one. The Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, somewhere in between those two poles, okay? With Warren closer to Bernie Sanders, Buttigieg, Klobuchar closer to Biden. And essentially the argument on the Bernie side is, look, you're not going to beat Donald Trump doing the same old things we've been doing and just thinking that going back to normal is going to motivate people to turn out. We lost in 2016 because a lot of folks stayed home, especially younger voters and younger voters of color. And they're not going to come turn out for a Democratic nominee who says, let's just kind of like move around the edges. Let's not make big changes. Let's not get too scary revolutionary, right? We need big structural change, and unless we give that as a message, those voters aren't going to turn out, and we're going to lose. And then the Biden campaign's message is basically, we need to just slow our roll, everybody, okay? Just slow this down. People are exhausted. Nobody wants another revolution. We've had 4 years of chaos. Nobody wants 4 more years of that. We win, and you can see Joe Biden doing this where he like puts on the aviator glasses and gets in the Camaro. He's like, we win with people like me driving to Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. I can win those people back. They are coming back only if we give them assurances that we're not going to be too far to the left and too disruptive. And over the course of the year, we've seen people sort of move, as I said, move within these 2 poles. Right now, Bernie Sanders has pretty well consolidated that revolutionary part. Elizabeth Warren's less than strong showing in Iowa, and she's struggling in New Hampshire, means I don't know if she does not do well in New Hampshire on Tuesday, I don't know how much longer she can stay in this race. And that really gives him a lane to himself. Now, it's not a huge lane, and he hasn't proven that he can expand the electorate, say, in the way that Barack Obama did. He's gotten somewhere between 25 and 30% of the vote. But in Iowa, we saw turnout not as high as it was in 2008, a little bit higher than it was in 2016. The Sanders campaign likes to point out that there were more young people involved in the caucuses this year, which is true, but the number of first-time caucus goers, in other words, people who'd never been involved in the process before, was pretty low, which also suggests that he's not expanding the tent. People are coming back who voted for him before, but he's not bringing in all kinds of new people. His biggest benefit right now, though, is the fact that that other lane that Biden was supposed to be dominating and had been until Iowa is now getting split 3 or 4 ways. Pete Buttigieg is in there, Amy Klobuchar's in there. Warren, even to a certain extent, was pulling some of those voters who want to see really fundamentally a candidate who can win. I can't tell you the number of voters that I have run into in Iowa and New Hampshire that are like, just tell me who can win. Please, can you tell me who that person is? And Biden was supposed to be that person until voters saw him in Iowa and on the debate stage. And he doesn't look like the kind of guy that's going to be able to do this. At least he hasn't shown that yet. I mean, those first few debates especially, right, where I've said this for a while, he reminds me sometimes of a man crossing a really icy parking lot, where the whole time you're just like, oh my God, is he gonna make it to his car? Like, oh my God, he's here. And, he too has a lot at stake in New Hampshire. If he comes in 3rd or 4th again, what he's counting on is, well, I'm going to bring in my secret weapon, which they don't exist in New Hampshire and Iowa, which are people of color. They're nowhere in those states. Believe me, I've spent a lot of time up there in the last 2 weeks. Not so much. But Nevada, yes. South Carolina, 2/3 of the electorate is African American. That's his firewall. That's his suggestion. But the problem is, by the time you get to South Carolina, he's already running low on money. And will voters give him the time? That's 2 weeks is a long time between New Hampshire and South Carolina. It's also, now there's another person who keeps popping into the scene here, which is Mike Bloomberg. And the more crowded that and confusing that restore lane, the sort of moderate, let's just beat who can beat Donald Trump lane is, well, Michael Bloomberg, this is the perfect scenario for him, right? That is what the campaign had hoped or had predicted would happen, is that Biden's weakness meant there's no real candidate to take up that mantle, and in swoops Michael Bloomberg and his $50 jillion to do that. Can he pick up enough delegates? I don't know. Are people going to let somebody come into the race, vote for somebody who they've really not vetted at all? Hasn't been in the debate stage. He might get the debate stage in Nevada, may not. He has to hit a polling threshold to get onto that. But other than that, people really, the only thing they've seen are the ads that he is flooding. And I'm sure many of you have seen them, especially digital ads. But it makes it even more confusing and then gets us to this place where political scientists and reporters love to think about, and the Democratic Party does not. And that is that there is a contested convention, that no one gets 50% of the delegates by the time the primaries are over, and some sort of deals have to be made, something has to happen either before we get to Milwaukee or while we're in Milwaukee. Again, fun for reporters, but for a party desperate to unify, for this to not happen until the middle of July is not particularly great. There's also the question of, will Democratic voters be okay with the person winning the nomination who's someone who didn't win the most votes, right? We're already seeing this in Iowa. Bernie Sanders said, well, I won the most votes. More people voted for me. I am the winner. And the Buttigieg campaign said, well, that's not how it works. It's like the Electoral College. I won the most delegates, so I won. Imagine that now, spread that out to, well, I got 42% of the total votes, so I should be the nominee, not the person who has 38%. Anyway, that's fun. Good times there. May not happen, but it's looking, the scenario is looking more likely the messier things get. And we'll know a lot more after Super Tuesday, which is March 3rd. By the end of March, 60% of all delegates will have been allocated. And the way that Democrats work, they do not have winner-take-all system. So it's good and bad for you as a Democratic candidate. The good news is you cannot, well, I don't know if this is good news. The reality is it's very hard if you are behind to get, run up a streak and win a bunch of delegates. Because just winning the state doesn't mean you win all the delegates. If you split that state with one or two other candidates, they get delegates too. So the math, like we saw in Iowa, gets even more complicated. Well, let's leave it here, which is this, the 2020 race. Look, I think we should expect this to be as close as it was in 2016. It's a race that's going to be decided on the margins. It's a race that is going to be not just simply who turns out the most, their base, the Trump base, the Democratic base, but figuring out who these swing voters are. In 2016, the swing voter was the person who said, I hate Hillary Clinton and I hate Donald Trump, and I can't believe you're making me choose that I have to vote for one of these people. It's like sticking a needle in my eye and chewing glass. I don't know which one is least uncomfortable, but I gotta do one of them. And at the end, those people broke overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. This election, we know there's one group of cross-pressured people already, those people who say the economy's good, they even like the job the president's doing on the economy, but they do not like him. And then there are the group of voters that don't get a whole lot of attention. We've gotten, after the 2016 election, reporters spent a whole lot of time in diners with white guys and hard hats, and we had to talk a lot about coal miners and factory workers. That was important. In 2018, we spent a lot of time with these suburban Peloton moms. But the group of voters that I think really becomes determinative in this election, especially if we're talking about the upper Midwest, are white women who are not college graduates. They're not evangelical. They voted for Donald Trump in 2016, but they are much less supportive of him now. They don't like his behavior. They certainly don't like a lot of his policies on things like healthcare. But they don't know a whole lot about the Democrats, and they're not paying a whole lot of attention to this primary process. And Democrats have to pay attention to what matters to them to win them back. Finally, I know it's always hard to try to find, like, where's the optimism? Can we find a little, like, we're gonna be okay piece in all of this? The best thing that I did to make me feel better about the time that we live in is to realize by reading history, and John Meacham has a very good book that's his newest book that I forgot in my bag to show you, but it's a very quick read. But he basically goes through our history as a country, and we are divided more than we're united throughout our history. This is not new to us. In fact, we are constantly trying to pull ourselves apart. And somehow we find a way to make this all work. And it's uncomfortable, and it is sometimes violent, but we have found a way to be an incredibly resilient, optimistic country. I don't doubt that we are still that place. And we are at something of a tipping point as well. We've been in the 21st century for 20 years now, but we still, I don't think, have fully accounted for that. We still are living within a world that was built in a post-Cold War era, post-World War II era, and we're still trying to fit all of the newness of this century into those same old boxes, and it's not gonna work. And those institutions have either failed or have collapsed, or we've lost faith in them, and they need to be replaced with something new, which is where you guys come in. That's what you have to do. Sorry, we're leaving it all up to you. You've got to fix all of this, right? No, you are part of the reason why I'm optimistic, that you still have faith in this process. And what I worry less about being a polarized country than I worry about a country where people just check out and decide it doesn't matter anymore. Oh, why does my vote matter? Oh, it's all rigged anyway. Oh, this votes are going to get stolen anyway. If you believe that and follow that, something else is going to take your place. You're going to leave a vacuum, and something's going to fill it. And usually it's not a good thing that fills that. So it is important to remain as engaged as you can. You are already incredibly engaged in this country, in what you're doing in communities and the service that you're bringing to these communities. But being engaged and involved in the process is important too, even if the outcome isn't exactly what you would like to see. We need to keep this system intact, and that's the role that all of us play. And I do believe at the end of the day, the system itself is strong enough to handle it if we believe it. So with that, thank you. And we're going to take some questions, correct? All right, thanks very much.